Hey there, my people, and welcome. Today I'd like to introduce you to an episode from Alfred Hitchcock's short-running TV series called Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I believe there were only about 20 episodes made, and this was one of them. I believe one of the best episodes. We've got stay-at-home pregnant wife Mary and her husband Patrick. Patrick comes home from work one day and tells Mary he's leaving her for another chick. And well, let's just see how Mary responds to the news. We see Mary greeting her husband Patrick at the door as he's returned home from work. Apparently he's a police officer. She gives him a kiss on the cheek, which he doesn't reciprocate, and in reality it appears he doesn't even acknowledge it. His eyes are averted and he's not even looking at her. Patrick steps away from Mary, literally without even acknowledging her presence. He doesn't say a word to her. She asks him how his day went, no response. His back is to her and he's pouring himself a drink. He hasn't even bothered to take off his coat. Mary sees that he seems to be distracted, and so she comes up behind him, nuzzles him, trying to engage him in conversation, but he ignores her, not saying a word. He finished pouring himself a drink, and he moves away from Mary. Then he takes a healthy swallow from the glass, as if fortifying himself. And then Patrick speaks for the first time since coming through the door. And this is what this bum tells her. I got this other chick. I'm in love with her. I want to make something work with her. I'm leaving you. Now, the chick is standing there wearing maternity clothes. So, she's obviously pregnant. You the husband, you know she's pregnant, and you know that this kid, your kid. You don't even mention the kid. You don't even mention her condition. You don't even mention or acknowledge that, okay, this is what, the 50s, 60s? These chicks don't work. They stay at home. They take care of the house and the kids. Other than, I am leaving you. This dude don't say nothing else. He don't say, I'm going to send you money. I'm going to be around to take care of the kid. Don't be worried. Don't be scared. The only thing this dude has to say is, I have found somebody else. I am out of here. Deuces.
I won't let you.
Try and stop me.
Okay, you know what, peeps? This dude just took a shovel out of the garage and started digging his own hole in the backyard. Just how cold and cruel can you be, dude? She's scared. You are walking out on her and you haven't given her nary a piece of reassurance about nothing. As far as this chick is concerned, her life just took a left turn into the twilight zone and she got nothing. No reassurance, no words to allay her fears, nada. And you telling this scared, frightened, and yes, desperate woman whose life you've wrecked and sent spiraling over a cliff with one cruel sentence, deuces, I'm out. You tell her to try and stop you from leaving her. Okay, boo-boo, let's see what's gonna happen next. So Mary walks out to the garage, almost in a daze. I think the chick's been shocked to her very core. I mean, who wouldn't be? Her husband left this morning and she was clueless to the fact that her whole entire world in reality would be torn apart in just a few hours. Yes, Mary seems to be on autopilot. She's in the garage. She lifts the lid to the freezer, reaches in and pulls out the biggest leg of lamb I've ever seen in my life. That thing must weigh 20 pounds. She walks back into the kitchen, lays it on the counter, and unwraps the butcher paper that's covering it. She looks at the leg of lamb and then at her husband, whose back is still to her. He's fidgeting with things on the table, going through papers, or maybe he's going through the mail. Whichever it is, he's engrossed and distracted. Peeps, that chick wound up to crack this dude in the head. I mean, she bent all the way backwards to get into that momentum, and he is so focused getting his mail and getting out of there to start his wonderful new life that he's clueless that all his little happily ever after plans are all about to change. Sister Girl sledgehammers this dude, and he is down and out for the count. Mary checks her husband and confirms he's no longer in the land of the living. Now, peeps, major problem solved. If she could just cover it up in a way to protect herself. Look, this dude was a cop, right? Looks like he had a bit of age on him, so he should have a decent pension, Social Security, and likely a life insurance policy. So Mary's okay from a financial standpoint, even with a little whippersnapper on the way. She should have a decent monthly income coming in, but she must cover her tracks. She's got to come up with a plausible plan and carry it through without faltering. So first things first, Mary's got to deal with the sledgehammer of a weapon. She makes her way to the kitchen, walking as if in a daze, peeps, like she's on autopilot. She goes straight to the oven, and Sister Girl is brilliant. She's going to cook this frozen leg of lamb, transferring it from a lethal weapon into a tender, tasty meal. Mary pops the leg of lamb in the oven and sets the temperature dial. And yes, peeps, I remember this exact type of oven being in my mom's and my grandma's house, where there was this dial on the front that you had to kind of push in a little bit and then twist, and you just needed to align your temperature up with that. So yeah, this is a little bit of a blast from the past for me. Now, Mary's got one problem solved, but there's still the business of what to do with the body in the next room. Mary is really going to have to come up with a whole cover story, and one plausible enough where she will never be considered as the one who unalived her husband. She was going to need one heck of an alibi. And so, peeps, she's sitting in the kitchen and eating grapes and thinking and thinking and thinking, because her entire life and freedom depends on what she comes up with. After spending some time thinking, Mary seems to have come up with a plan. She begins with establishing an alibi. She calls a friend on the phone and chats her up a bit, being sure to tell this friend that she had to run out to the grocery store to pick up a few items. After hanging up with the friend, Mary puts on her coat, and then she overturns some furniture and knocks some things over to make it appear there was a struggle before her husband was unalived. Continuing with the ruse, Mary goes to the neighborhood grocery store. She does a bit of shopping and returns home. Once inside, she lifts the bag of groceries over her head and lets the bag drop, resulting in groceries being spilled all over the floor. Now Mary has done everything she could think to do. Her plan is as complete as it can be. The only thing left now is to alert the police.
Mrs. Maloney, you said you didn't notice anything particularly unusual about your husband's behavior when he came in this evening.
All righty, here we go, peeps. Now Mary is sitting on the sofa while the police do their thing. She already knows she's going to get question after question, and she can't make a mistake. She's got her alibi and her story in her head. She just has to maintain her calm. Don't get rattled. Don't make any mistakes. She simply needs to believe her own story. That's really all she has to do. Don't do too much embellishing. Don't fancy it up. Keep it simple. Just stick to your story. Mary tells the officer that she didn't notice anything in particular about her husband when he came home, just that he seemed terribly tired. The officer remarked that he noticed her husband had a drink, and Mary responds that he always had a drink when he came home from work. He usually took soda, the officer says. Yes, I guess so, Mary responds. And ice, of course, the officer adds. Mary says. Then the officer says this. This evening he took it straight, and with his coat on. Right? Yes, I suppose he did, Mary says. Girlfriend, come on, be careful. Be careful, pay attention to this guy. She not making eye contact with him. He's sitting off to the side. She's sitting on the sofa looking straight ahead. I think that's great. Come on, peeps. It's tough to look at people and lie to them to their face. Also, somebody like a trained police officer can perhaps spot you lying if he looks you dead in your face, dead in your eyes. So I hand it to Sister Girl that she is simply sitting in the sofa looking straight ahead, and even though she's talking to this guy, he's asking questions or saying things to her, she hasn't turned her head one time. Okay, girl, you're on the right track, but pay attention, because this dude will trip you up if you're not careful.
He comes in the door, so what's the first thing he does after that?
He kissed me.
You're quite sure he kissed you? It wasn't you that kissed him?
He kissed me.
Okay.
Now the officer's gotten up and moved closer to Mary, literally standing right behind her, bending down, getting close into her space. He wants to go through the whole thing with her, starting from when the husband got home. Notice Mary's lie to the officer when he asked if she kissed him or he kissed her. Some might think, what's the difference? What does it matter? But it matters a whole lot. We know that Patrick barely spared Mary a glance. He tossed back a drink to get enough courage to tell her he was leaving her. Then he turned his back to her while he was busy collecting papers and looking through the mail. Mary's lie to the officer, telling him that Patrick kissed her, was important because it demonstrated all was well between them. Clearly, Patrick didn't have any issues with his wife if he's the one kissing her up. Now, Brother Man wants to take Mary step by step with this thing, starting from the beginning. Now, my peeps, this is where a sister can get tripped up. Come on now, say enough, girlfriend, but not too much.
I walk straight over there, and he pours himself a shot of neat whiskey, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't usually have a drink before he takes his coat off, does he?
No, I guess not.
Now the officer says to Mary, You saw all this and you still didn't think he was a worried man? Mary says to him, I told you, I just felt that he was very tired. You know what, peeps? Let me be sitting there, all of 6 months pregnant, and this dude saying to me, you saw all this with your husband and didn't think he was worried? You know what, officer? I've spent half the day projectile vomiting and stinky farting because I've been constipated for 2 days with this baby I'm carrying in my tummy. My ankles have doubled in size, they so swollen. And I haven't had a good night's sleep in almost a week because this kid has been keeping me up with this little acrobatics. I walked all the way to the grocery store with my back cussing me out every step I took. So, no sir, I didn't notice anything off with Patrick. Now, girlfriend, look him dead in his face and you say that to him. Say that to him. Because you sitting there all big and pregnant. And if this dude has so much as one kid in his house, he knew the living heck his wife put him through with her pregnancy. And so, yeah, he probably can be just a little tad understanding that your pregnancy might have you a little off. Your pregnancy might have you a little distracted, which is very common and very normal. See, if it was me sitting up in there, that is exactly what I would have said to Brother Man, and then probably this line of discussion might take a more understanding or sympathetic tone. Just saying.
You know what I think, Mrs. Maloney? I think he was desperately worried. And if we can only find out why this was, then perhaps we'll be able to get somewhere.
Well, I wish I could help you more.
The other thing I want to find is the weapon.
Well, good luck with that. Girlfriend, that was a brilliant stroke of genius, cooking that leg of lamb. I can't imagine there being anything on it after having been cooked for hours upon hours that could point to it as being what was used to unalive Patrick. And further, the officer saying that he believes Patrick was desperately worried is way off. Sure, he took a healthy swig of booze for courage to tell his pregnant wife he was leaving her. But once those words was out of Brother Man's mouth, he was all done with it. And he was cool to the point where he actually turned his back to her. He wasn't worried, a lot, or desperately. Or he would never have turned his back to a woman he just shanked in the heart. No, peeps, Brother Man wasn't worried about anything. He wasn't worried he was leaving his wife pregnant with his kid. He's cold-blooded. Not desperate, just cold-blooded. The lead officer calls Mike and tells him to go outside and comb every inch of the garden and to have the guys that were already outside help him. See what you can find, the lead officer says, and take some flashlights with you. Then the lead officer tells Mike he's going to check the rest of the house.
You know, somehow I don't believe that this was premeditated murder. I think it was a quarrel, and then someone lost their temper. And then whoever it was simply grabbed hold of some object that happened to be close at hand and swung at your husband.
Whoa, buddy, she thinking, peeps. Girlfriend is thinking. Look at her eyes, they're just darting, and her brain is taking it all in. Notice her head has not moved an inch. Still no eye contact with the police officer. But she is taking in everything he's saying, and it's like she's calculating right there on the spot where she could get tripped up. There is no weapon outside, buried in the garden, over near the tree, in the bushes. There is no weapon outside, and she knows it. And there's no weapon really inside the house. There's no weapon over in the bookcase. There's no weapon over in the fireplace. There's no weapon upstairs under the bed. The only quote-unquote weapon inside that house is in the oven, and she knows it. and it's been in the oven for hours, with any and all tangible evidence just cooking away. Oh yeah, sister girl, be cool. Be real cool, and you're gonna get away with this thing.
If I'm right, then the weapon they used was probably something that was already in this house. Can you tell me if there's anything missing from this room that could have been used as a weapon?
Well, I'm not sure what sort of thing you mean.
Peeps, girlfriend is analyzing everything brother man is saying. She's thinking hard. Look at her face. Just look at her eyes. You can almost see the wheels turning in her mind. She's taking her time responding to his questions and giving him the sense that she wants to be helpful, but she's not sure what he means. She's not sure how she could help him. Oh, I'm just sitting on this sofa clueless. That's me. The officer tells her they're looking for something, like a club, for instance. And Mary says, "A club? You mean something like a baseball bat?" And he says, "Yes, exactly," almost excitedly. "Well, no," she says, "there isn't any baseball bat in the house." But there's a 20-pound leg of lamb cooking in the oven. Oh, people. Okay. Then the officer says, "How about a doorstop or a heavy metal vase? Anything. You understand what I mean, don't you?" "Yes, I think so," she says innocently. "It's just so hard for me to remember everything that's in the house." Okay, girlfriend is in her stride now. If she was anxious or scared or the least bit concerned before, it is definitely gone. She's hit exactly on what she needs to do to be safe. Just act clueless. Then the officer says, "Maybe you won't mind coming along with me while I go over the rooms one by one." And with nary a sound coming out of her mouth, with nary a question, Mary just gets up and follows after him. Now the officer asks the guy who's dusting for prints if he's almost done, and the guy says yeah. And he asks the time. The officer tells him it's 10:15, and then he asks Mary if she's sure she doesn't want someone to take her to a neighbor's house for the night. And Mary says no. The officer then tells her she needs to lie down, and either he or Mike will be there all night, so she doesn't have to worry. And Mary responds with, "I might do that." Then the officer and Mike step away purposely out of earshot of Mary.
There's something fishy about this case. I don't believe there ever was a fight in this room. I think someone purposely fixed it up afterwards to make it look as though there'd been one. It isn't humanly possible to club a man hard on the back of the head, right here in the middle of a fight.
Both officers are talking low, but Mary is listening. The lead guy is still bugged by this thing, and he can't let it go. It just all smells a little too fishy to him. Mike suggests maybe there were two people. The officer says he doesn't think there were two people. Mike then says maybe he got knocked out during the fight and then conked on the head when he was down. The officer said he hadn't been knocked out first. There wasn't a single bruise or scratch anywhere on him except for the back of his head, where he was struck.
He was carrying a gun, wasn't he?
Sure was.
And why didn't he draw it? You know why? Because he didn't even realize he was being threatened.
But it was probably someone he knew. You think could have been a woman?
The funny thing here is that they're piecing it together, but all they've got is a slice of Swiss cheese, something with a lot of holes in it. No motive and no weapon, and they need at least one or the other to get this case figured out. Now the officer asks Mike why he suggests that the assailant might be a woman, and Mike responds with, "You know as well as I do that Patrick used to fool around a bit. every now and again. And the officer says, yeah, I see what you mean. And he says, we've got to find that weapon. The officer turns to head back towards Mary when he glances at the oven. Hey, didn't anyone think to turn off that oven? And he goes into the kitchen with Mike behind him. Mary, who's been eavesdropping on everything, turns in the chair watching the two men who were now in the kitchen at the stove. The officer takes some oven mitts, opens the oven door, and says whatever it is should be ruined by now. And he's gingerly pulling out the pan with the cooked leg of lamb in it. Hey, it looks all right, he says. It sure does, Mike agrees. It's mighty peculiar, the officer says, placing the pan down. I'd have thought it would have been burnt to a crisp by now. Me too, Mike says. Maybe it takes longer according to how big it is, the officer says. Well, this is a big one, all right, Mike says. You're darn right it's big, the officer agrees. Mary is standing in the kitchen doorway, and she's smiling. Mary says, Jack, can you turn that off for me, please? And the officer does. She tells them the leg of lamb is okay, it's not spoiled, and Officer Jack tells her he can see that. Mary says the real reason she came into the kitchen was to offer them a cup of coffee. You must be terribly tired by now, both of you, she says, and she apologizes for not thinking of it sooner. Officer Jack tells her it's not necessary, telling her she needn't bother about them. She tells them that Patrick would never forgive her if she didn't look after them properly, and she says this as she's making her way into the kitchen. Mary tells them that Patrick used to tell her how grateful he was in the old days when somebody would offer him a cup of coffee when he couldn't get home for a meal. That's the least you can do for somebody who's trying to help you out, she says. Now Mary gives the cooked leg of lamb a hard stare, and she says this.
I tell you what, why don't you help yourself to some of this, too?
No, we couldn't do that, Mrs. Maloney. We'll be sending out for a couple of sandwiches in a little while.
Oh, no, now please. Eat this instead.
And Mary tells them she'll have to throw it out if they don't. What about you, Mike asks. Me? Mary says. Oh, I couldn't touch a thing, believe me. And she adds, give some to the others too. They must be absolutely famished by this time, especially those two standing out in the cold. Ask them all in, she says. Why don't you give them all a nice hot meal? It's very good meat, she adds. I promise you that. Yes, all nice, tenderized upside her husband's head. Needless to say, the fellas have torn into this meal like it was Thanksgiving dinner. And Mary really put out a spread, using her good china too. The fellas are eating and saying what a great meal this is. One saying it's the best piece of meat he's had in months. She said to finish it, didn't she, Jack? One of the officers asks. She sure did, Officer Jack says. Mike's going in for another slice of meat, and he says, I'd like to have a piece of this brown crispy stuff left on the end. Okay, peeps, who want to take a guess as to what that might be? Then Mike asks Officer Jack if he thinks it would be okay for him to take the lamb bone home to his dog. Jack says sure. Mary says she didn't want to see any of this again, so eat it all. One of the cops asks Officer Jack if they've got anything on this case yet. Not a lot, Officer Jack says. The doctor said the weapon was some kind of club, something heavy, weighing about 8 or 9 pounds. Or, if it's a froze leg of lamb, it could be upwards of 20 pounds, but that's just my humble opinion. One of the officers speculates that no one would carry something like that around any longer than they needed.
Personally, I think it's here on the premises.
Well, for all we know, it might be right under our very noses.
Well, my peeps, there you have it. What I enjoyed about this episode is that it was short and sweet and not very complicated at all. You sort of figured Mary was going to get out of this, but the fun was seeing the calculated steps she'd have to take to get there. I love the fact that the guys ate the evidence. That was stellar. And Mike taking the bone home with him for his dog, that was the cherry on top of the cake. Also, I like the fact that Mary laughs at the end. Sure, she got away with unaliving her husband, but the ending gives the viewer the idea that Mary's going to be okay. As for the directing, I love Alfred Hitchcock every day of the week. He is so my jam. He's my favorite director, hands down. He has his own style and flair, and he can take something small, like a 30-minute story, and treat it like it was an hour-and-a-half movie. That brother don't skimp at all. He just does him so well. And with the ending, peeps, I really couldn't give you a long clip, but the camera movement is reminiscent of the ending of Psycho. Here, Alfred does that slow-moving, closer and closer thing he did at the end of Psycho with Norman Bates sitting in that chair. He does the exact same thing here with Mary. It's classically his move, and it just makes for a really good ending. Okay, my peeps, that's it for now. Shout out to my subscribers. You're a joy to me. You really are. And those of you who are my viewers, think about commenting and subscribing. It so helps the channel. Like, share, and come back. Y'all be sweet now. Until next time.